You're checking your phone again. Nothing. No message, no sign. Just silence. And yet, in your mind, you're replaying the last conversation, analyzing every word, every emoji, every pause, as if somewhere between those gaps lies the proof that she actually cared, that she just needed time, that maybe tomorrow she'll say what you've been waiting to hear. But deep down, something inside you already knows. You're building a castle on sand. You're clinging to a hope that was never invited. You're investing in a future that was never promised. That's the trap. Not because she lied, but because you created the entire narrative alone. You watched her laugh, talk, live, and you took those casual glances and basic kindness as signs. You interpreted politeness as flirtation, a how was your day as a promise, and now you're emotionally exhausted from loving someone who never even offered you her time, let alone her heart. This isn't just disappointment. This is emotional hallucination, a prison built from your own need to be needed. You didn't fall for her. You fell for the potential, for who she could become in your life if she just saw what you saw. And that's the most dangerous kind of love, the one that only exists in your imagination. Because it has no anchor, no reality check. It grows wild, unrestricted by truth. And the more you feel, the more you're sure that if you just do the right thing, say the right words, stay a little longer, she'll finally see you, finally choose you. But here's the brutal truth. People don't fall in love with effort. They fall in love with presence, energy, power, not desperation disguised as devotion. And the more you give, the more invisible you become. Not because giving is wrong, but because giving without value in return is charity. And nobody falls in love with charity. Especially not someone who never asked for it in the first place. You see, we assume that love is something we earn, that if we're kind enough, attentive enough, loyal enough, the other person will reciprocate. But emotions don't work like contracts. You don't get love back just because you sent good morning texts for 6 months straight. You don't earn someone's heart by being available every time they feel lonely. Because sometimes you're not being chosen. You're being used to fill silence, to validate ego, to kill boredom. And you call that love. But it's not. It's one-sided worship. It's self-inflicted abandonment. And it has nothing to do with her. She might not even be malicious. She might just be emotionally distant, focused on herself, unclear about what she wants. But you made it all mean something. You turned her inconsistencies into puzzles worth solving, her coldness into emotional depth, her distance into mystery. You thought you found a hidden gem, but all you found was someone who's not ready, or simply not interested. That's where the pain comes from, not from her silence, but from your refusal to hear what that silence has been screaming from the start, that you are not what she's looking for, that your presence doesn't spark her urgency, that your efforts are landing in an emotional vacuum, and instead of walking away, you stay. You think staying proves your strength, your loyalty, your worth, but it doesn't. It only proves one thing, that you're willing to betray yourself in the hope that someone else will finally see your value. And betrayal of the self is the worst kind, because it doesn't just wound, it erodes. Your confidence, your masculinity, your clarity. You go from man to shadow, from self-respecting to self-sacrificing, until one day you realize that all the pain you're feeling, you signed up for it. You kept showing up where you weren't being invited. You kept offering your heart to someone who never reached for it. And now you're angry, but not at her, at yourself, because you knew, you always knew. But you hoped that love would change the rules. And that's the myth that breaks men, that love conquers all, that patience wins the war, that one day if you just keep showing how much you care, she'll wake up and finally give back. But here's the truth. What you tolerate becomes your pattern. And when you teach someone that you'll stick around regardless of how little they give, they'll believe you. They'll take you for granted. Not because they're evil, but because you gave them the blueprint. You showed them how to treat you. Every unanswered message, every last-minute plan you accepted, every time you justified her silence, every time you forgave her absence without an apology, you taught her that your heart was cheap, that your value could be bought with scraps, that your presence came with no price, and nothing kills desire faster than the man who costs nothing emotionally. Women don't respect availability without weight, kindness without confidence, love without boundaries, because those things don't feel masculine. They feel needy, and no woman desires what she pities. She may appreciate you, but appreciation is not attraction, and respect is not romance. If your presence doesn't create gravity, if it doesn't make her pause, wonder, chase, then it's just background noise, always there, always safe, never missed. And that's the wound you carry. You're not hated, you're not even disliked. You're simply not chosen, because the space you fill in her life is too convenient, too easy, too expected. And the problem isn't that she won't choose you. It's that you refuse to stop offering yourself to someone who's already emotionally gone. So ask yourself honestly, when did your value become something negotiable? When did your attention stop being a privilege and become a habit she barely notices? When did you decide that being tolerated was enough? Because until you answer that, you'll keep creating expectations in people who never promised you anything, and you'll keep suffering the same heartbreak, not because they hurt you, but because you never had the courage to walk away from where you were never seen. You probably think your love is pure because it asks for nothing in return. You tell yourself it's real because you feel deeply, because you're patient, because you're still here. But love that requires you to disappear in order to be accepted is not love, it's submission. And submission disguised as affection is one of the most effective ways to destroy a man from the inside out. The most dangerous trap isn't when someone lies to you. It's when you lie to yourself. When you convince yourself that your pain is noble, that your sacrifice has purpose, that if you endure long enough, it will all pay off. But let me ask you something real. When was the last time you actually felt seen by her? Not just acknowledged, not just spoken to, truly seen, felt, respected? Or have you only been clinging to fragments? A heart emoji here, a call when she's bored, a compliment thrown your way like crumbs to keep you from walking away. Is that the version of love you're really willing to accept? You're not weak because you feel. You're not broken because you desire connection. But you do become emotionally bankrupt when you invest your worth in someone else's indecision, because indecision is not kindness, it's control. And if she really cared, she wouldn't let you float in this limbo. The truth is, if she loved you, you'd know. Not wonder, not wait, not overthink. You'd feel it in her energy, in her urgency, in her effort. But you don't feel that, do you? You feel confusion, distance, delay. You feel like you're always the one pulling, initiating, giving, hoping, and the silence that comes in return. That's the real answer, the one you keep refusing to accept. Let's be brutally honest. Sometimes she knows exactly what she's doing. Not all the time, not every woman, but some do. Some women are addicted to attention, not commitment, not love, just the rush of knowing someone would drop everything for them. And you, with your open heart, your emotional loyalty, your constant availability, become a tool, a mirror she can look into when she needs to feel desired, a backup she can run to when her real options fail. And the worst part? You still see her as special, as different, as worth it. She posts a picture. You're the first to like. She says she's tired. You offer to bring coffee. She talks about her problems. You listen like your soul depends on it. But when you finally open up, when you finally say how you feel, suddenly she's not ready. Suddenly she needs space. Suddenly your depth becomes too much. And you sit there blaming yourself, thinking you were too intense, too emotional, too present. But that's not it. The real issue is she never saw you as the one. She saw you as the safe one. And safety without mystery rarely creates passion. You became predictable, reliable, always there. And in the cruel logic of emotional imbalance, that makes you disposable. Because desire isn't born from comfort, it's born from polarity, from edge, from presence that doesn't beg, but demands to be felt. You gave love like a river without a dam, constant, overflowing, but she never built a container to receive it, so it spilled everywhere, unnoticed, unvalued. What you thought would bond you only blurred your identity. You lost your center trying to orbit around someone who barely gave you gravity, and now the man in the mirror doesn't look like a man anymore. He looks like a servant of his own fantasies, waiting, hoping, diminishing. But here's where everything can shift. If you're willing to feel the sting of truth, wanting someone is not wrong, but ignoring reality to keep wanting them is. Because you don't just betray yourself by staying, you train yourself to accept less. Every day you remain in this one-sided emotional contract, you're rewiring your brain to believe that your role in love is to be invisible until needed. That affection must be earned through suffering, that your masculinity must be softened to be tolerated. That belief will bleed into every future relationship you touch. It will dull your edge. It will make you over-explain, overthink, overextend. And slowly, you'll turn into a version of yourself that you were never meant to be. Tame, anxious, reactive. So stop asking why she doesn't love you the way you love her. Ask why you stayed after the first time she didn't. Ask why your standards became so negotiable. Ask what wound inside you taught you that devotion without reciprocation is noble. Because that's where the healing begins. Not in changing her mind, but in reclaiming your own. You don't need to convince her of your worth. You need to remember it. You don't need to win her over. You need to walk away with your dignity, because here's the secret that no one tells you. The most attractive man in the room is never the one begging to be loved. It's the one who knows he doesn't have to beg. And when you stop chasing, the power returns, not because she suddenly values you, but because you finally value yourself. And in that space, in that silence, something shifts. The desperation fades, the fog clears, and you see her not as your salvation, but as the lesson you needed to grow the spine your heart always deserved. You've probably heard the phrase, actions speak louder than words, but what they rarely tell you is that silence also screams. The kind of silence that doesn't mean peace, but power. The silence she gives you after you open your heart. The silence after your third message. The silence when you ask what's wrong and she says, nothing. That silence is not absence. It's a tool, a calculated move to keep you on the hook while never having to commit. And here's the twisted part. It works. Not because you're weak, but because you've been conditioned to mistake emotional withholding as mystery, when in truth, it's manipulation in its most seductive form. Think back to the last time she left you unread. You told yourself she was busy, that she didn't see it, that she would reply when she had time, but somewhere in your chest, you felt the sting, the micro-rejection, the reminder that in her world, you are not a priority, you are an option. And when someone keeps you as an option, it's not because they're confused, it's because they like what you give, but not who you are. They like the access to your attention, not the responsibility of matching your energy. They like the idea that you'll still be there, even after they ignore you for 3 days, post a story with someone else, and text you at 1 a.m. with a simple, hey, and you reply, every time. Not because you don't know better, but because your self-worth has become addicted to the rare moments she throws you a bone. You treat her bare minimum like a reward, a sign, a spark, when in reality it's a breadcrumb, enough to keep you emotionally alive, but never enough to make you feel truly valued. This isn't love, this is emotional starvation. And the worst part is, you've normalized it. You've convinced yourself that love is supposed to hurt, that patience will fix everything. That one day she'll wake up and finally see what's been right in front of her the whole time. But she won't, because she already knows. She knows exactly who you are, exactly how you feel, exactly how much you'd give. And she chooses not to reciprocate. Not because you aren't enough, but because your willingness to accept so little makes her give even less. And every time you show up after being dismissed, you teach her how to treat you. You reinforce a pattern where her distance earns your devotion, where her coldness makes you try harder. And the power dynamic flips, not by force, but by erosion, slowly, subtly, until one day you realize you've become a shadow of yourself, orbiting around someone who hasn't earned your light. Let's get real. You think your consistency will win her. But to someone who doesn't value you, consistency looks like desperation. You think your openness is refreshing. But to someone who thrives on control, it makes you predictable. And there's nothing less attractive to a manipulative heart than predictability, because unpredictability gives them the upper hand. It keeps you guessing, chasing, bleeding. Here's a truth you need to face. People don't always treat you based on who you are. They treat you based on what you tolerate. And right now, your tolerance is teaching her that she can keep you in her orbit without ever having to land. That you'll wait. That you'll hope. That your love is unconditional, not in a poetic way, but in a way that erases your own needs. And that's where you lose the game. Because love without boundaries isn't love. It's sacrifice without meaning. It's martyrdom with no altar. It's the slow suicide of your self-respect in the name of potential. Let me tell you something brutal. She's not going to change. Not because she's evil, but because she doesn't need to. She gets the benefits of your loyalty without the price of commitment. She gets your attention, your time, your vulnerability, while still exploring her options, still entertaining other people, still playing the field. And when she gets bored, when she feels empty, when her real interest falls apart, she'll reach out, just enough to revive your hope, just enough to keep you close, and then she'll disappear again. That's not confusion, that's a cycle. And if you're in it, you're not a victim, you're a volunteer. Now here's what most men never do. Stop explaining, stop hoping, stop chasing, start observing, start analyzing, start reclaiming. Because the moment you stop reacting to her silence is the moment you start speaking your value. The moment you stop replying instantly is the moment you create scarcity. And scarcity, my friend, is the root of all value. Not just in economics, in relationships too. The less available you are, the more they notice your absence. The more you respect your time, the more others have to earn it. And when someone has to earn something, they no longer take it for granted. So take a step back, watch her patterns, observe her energy, measure her effort, and instead of interpreting her silence as mystery, see it for what it is. A lack of interest dressed up as emotional independence. You want her to respect you. Leave the conversation when she stops participating. You want her to chase you, become a man she has to reach for, not one who's always waiting. And if she never reaches, let her go, because you are not someone to be remembered only when she's lonely. You are not a placeholder. You are not a plan B. You are the storm she never saw coming. When you finally realize that your presence was never the problem, her blindness was. Most men believe that proving their worth is a matter of persistence. That if they just love hard enough, wait long enough, show up often enough, one day she'll understand what she has and stop playing games. But what they don't realize is that the more you prove yourself to someone who isn't invested, the more you confirm your own emotional poverty. You're not showing her strength. You're showing her that your entire sense of value depends on her approval. And that's exactly where she gains control. She doesn't have to be cruel. She doesn't even have to speak. All she has to do is be distant. And your anxiety does the rest. Your mind runs in circles trying to decode every action, every pause, every sigh. And suddenly your life becomes a performance. You start doing things not because you want to, but because you hope she'll notice. You modify your schedule, your words, your interests, all in the hope that this time you'll finally be enough to capture her full attention. But here's the dark reality. Once you start negotiating your identity for someone's affection, you've already lost. Because love is not earned by sacrificing who you are, it's earned by honoring who you are and making others meet you there. The man who bends backward to be chosen is never seen as valuable. He's seen as convenient, replaceable, disposable, because what comes with too much effort too easily is never truly respected. Imagine this: you've given her consistency, loyalty, validation. You've opened up emotionally, supported her during tough times, made sacrifices, and yet she still treats you like a side quest in her emotional story. She responds when it's convenient. She flirts with attention, but withholds commitment. She posts cryptic stories, but gives no real communication. That isn't love, that's a power play. And you're losing it every time you hope instead of act. The truth is, she already decided how much you mean to her. That decision didn't come from one big moment. It came from hundreds of small ones, from how quickly you replied, from how available you made yourself, from how predictable you became. And in the realm of attraction, predictability kills desire. Not because consistency is bad, but because when it lacks mystery, it becomes background noise. Let's talk about something rarely mentioned: emotional scarcity. It's not manipulation, it's magnetism. When your presence is rare and valuable, people notice your absence. But when you're always there, always reaching, always chasing, you become part of the emotional furniture, comfortable but invisible. The man who disappears when he's not valued is not running away. He's enforcing value. And that's a language even the most detached woman understands. Think of any man she ever cried over. He didn't explain himself constantly. He didn't beg for understanding. He didn't orbit her like a lost satellite. He walked. And that silence hit harder than any speech ever could, because silence isn't empty, it echoes, especially when it comes from someone who used to give everything. This is the shift. You're no longer trying to be chosen. You're observing who chooses you when you stop performing. You're watching who makes effort when you stop initiating. You're measuring her interest, not with your heart, but with your eyes, with your logic, with your standards. Because standards aren't about arrogance, they're about clarity. And when you get clear, the fog she created starts to dissolve. Let me give you a practical example. Imagine you usually text her every morning. "Good morning, hope you have a great day." You've done this for weeks, maybe months. Now, stop. Just once. Watch what happens. If she reaches out, initiates, expresses confusion or care, you've got a signal. If not, you've got your answer. It's brutal, but clarity always is. And in that clarity, you'll realize the power you've been giving away, the emotional energy you've been bleeding for someone who wouldn't hand you a bandage. And once you see that, something inside you changes. The urge to chase dies. The need to be seen fades. The addiction to her validation breaks. Because now you're not seeking a seat at her table, you're building your own. You become the kind of man who isn't afraid to walk away, not because he doesn't care, but because he finally cares about himself more. And when a man reaches that point, everything shifts. His energy, his posture, his decisions. Women feel it, people feel it, because presence without desperation is rare. And in a world full of emotional beggars, a man who refuses to plead becomes irresistible. You're not here to convince her. You're here to convince yourself that you're enough, that your love is not a charity, that your time is not a favor, that your life is not a waiting room for someone who can't decide if you're worth it. You already are. And now it's time to show that, not through more giving, but through graceful absence. There comes a point when a man stops asking why she pulled away and starts asking why he kept holding on. It's a subtle but life-changing pivot. Because it's in that moment, he realizes the truth. Her silence was never the real betrayal. His own refusal to accept it was. You can feel when someone no longer sees you. You sense it in the delayed replies, in the generic responses, in the way their eyes glaze over when you're speaking. You feel it in the shift from warmth to politeness, from curiosity to convenience, and yet you stay. You invent reasons. You blame timing. You romanticize the past. Because if you let go, you're afraid it will mean none of it ever mattered. But here's the brutal truth. If you're the only one still holding the thread, the connection is already broken. You're not in a relationship. You're in a performance, a monologue disguised as a dialogue. And that realization cuts deep. Because once you see how long you've been begging for breadcrumbs, every kind gesture you made starts to feel like self-betrayal. You didn't love her wrong. You loved her too much when she was giving too little. That's not romance, that's starvation. Now, let's dismantle the illusion of hope, the most seductive prison a man can live in. Hope that she'll change. Hope that she'll come back. Hope that your loyalty will somehow awaken hers. But hope without evidence is not faith, it's delusion. And when you fuel your decisions based on a future that only you are imagining, you become emotionally bankrupt. You trade your peace for fantasies. You stay awake for someone who sleeps soundly without you. You keep showing up for someone who would never do the same if the roles were reversed. Do you want to know what women remember? Not the man who always said yes, not the man who waited, not the man who stayed. They remember the one who walked with dignity, the one who left without shouting, the one who didn't argue when he was being disrespected. He simply vanished, not to manipulate, not to create drama, but because he refused to let someone keep lowering his value while calling it love. Let me paint a picture. A man texts her for weeks, consistent, kind, available. He never misses a good morning or a sweet check-in. She replies when she wants, short, distracted, half there. He keeps hoping. Then one day, he just stops. No warning, no closure, nothing, just silence. And in that vacuum, something shifts. For the first time, she's no longer being chased. And whether she admits it or not, she feels it, not because she lost him, but because she lost the control. And that's where your power begins. Not in reclaiming her, but in reclaiming yourself, your dignity, your energy, your emotional focus. You start realizing that love is not about how much you give, it's about who gives back. Real connection doesn't drain you, it uplifts you. Real love doesn't confuse you, it grounds you. Now comes the most difficult step, emotional discipline. It's the ability to sit with discomfort without running back to what hurt you. It's refusing to reopen doors just because you're lonely. It's learning to miss someone and still not text them. That's the difference between a man and a slave to his own need for approval. You're not seeking healing from her anymore. You're healing from the version of yourself that needed her to feel complete. You begin to see patterns. You start to notice how often you've repeated this cycle, getting attached too fast, investing too deeply, ignoring the warning signs. And instead of shaming yourself, you study it. Because the man who studies his own pain becomes dangerous. He becomes aware, he becomes intentional, he becomes the kind of man who doesn't beg for attention, he commands it by presence alone. You also learn to reframe rejection. It's no longer a reflection of your inadequacy, it's a revelation of misalignment. She didn't leave because you weren't enough. She left because you were too much for what little she had to give. And now, instead of shrinking to fit small hearts, you expand. You speak less. You observe more. You move differently. Not colder, just clearer. There's a point in every man's journey where he realizes the highest form of power is peace. Not detachment born from bitterness, but detachment born from self-respect. That's when your energy becomes sacred. That's when you no longer fear losing people, because you finally found yourself. And when she looks back, as they always do, she won't remember the man who pleaded for her time. She'll remember the one who walked away without looking back, the one who didn't try to prove anything, the one who loved but never begged, the one who respected himself more than her approval. You see, power doesn't scream. Power whispers. It doesn't chase. It attracts. And now, you are no longer available for negotiations where your value is questioned. You are no longer accessible to people who confuse kindness with weakness. You are no longer in the business of fixing what doesn't want to be held. You are the storm she didn't prepare for, the silence she never thought would come, and by the time she understands your worth, it will be too late. Not because you changed, but because you finally saw clearly what you deserved. Now take that truth and build from it. Not a fantasy, not a revenge, but a kingdom. One where your peace is guarded, your time is honored, and your heart is no longer handed out like an open bar. The game is different now, because you're not playing to be chosen. You're playing to be remembered.